This is Rob Rowe of the Shapeshifting Reality Podcast. Also working with Debbie Dashinger of the Dare to Dream Podcast. We have the great good fortune to bring you a wonderful conversation with Dr. Jeff McNairy, the medical director of Rythmia. If you are at all interested in the spread of plant medicine, how it works biochemically in the brain, how it works spiritually, how it works as far as healing, the cultural aspects, the spread across the globe, and how it's impacting various societies in different parts of the world, you are really going to love this. So please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Jeff McNairy of Rythmia.
Hi, it's Rob Rowe from the Dare to Dream Podcast and the Shapeshifting Reality Podcast. Working here at Rythmia with Deb Dashinger, the famous queen of all media. And I have the honor to be here with Jeff McNairy, medical director of Rythmia. So Jeff, you guys have been very present online. A lot of people know your story.
Yep.
The whole LA community, all the people I associate with, and probably most of our listeners have either heard of Rythmia and are interested or have already been here.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have given a lot of good background already, so I'd really like to hit the ground running here. And if you just maybe give our listeners an overview of what's new at Rythmia, what is happening now, what's the future looking like.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of give us a big picture of what people can expect now and going forward.
Cool. Okay, so I'm the Chief Medical Officer. I'm Dr. Jeff. I'm the guy that kind of runs the facility. I worked with the government to get us licensed medically with the Ministry of Health of Costa Rica. I'm from Los Angeles, and Rythmia is an amazing place because it's a really safe environment to do ayahuasca. And people that come here usually are first timers. They've never done plant medicine before. And the reason they come to us is because it's inviting and safe, super clean, amazing food. We have a lot of program modalities. In addition to the plant medicine, we have a hydrocolonic cleanse program that people get. We have a lot of body work. There's tons of classes. We have often guest speakers every week, all these different thought leaders from around the world, amazing, famous people. And there's just a great sense of community that people establish here at Rythmia. And we're client-centered, so each individual person that comes to Rythmia is a unique soul, and we believe that if you're plugged into yourself and if you're united with who you really are as a person, then you can overcome all adversity and you can deal with the emotional stuff. My background's in mental health, and I worked with a lot of really severe people in Los Angeles, whether it was trauma or addiction or women's health issues and all kinds of stuff that was like a little rough. And I've never seen the results ever in my life that I have here at Rythmia because the plant medicine is very beneficial to help people plug into themselves. And what's going on at Rythmia, the big picture, is that we're selling out almost every week, and we're looking to hopefully expand in the future, whether that's grow here in Costa Rica or have other sites in different parts of the world. That's something we're kind of like just looking at. We also just launched our Rythmia Love dating application, which is for people that want to either just have friendships or romantic relationships with people that are like-minded, that like yoga or meditation, or like plant medicine, for example. And there's ways that it's called getting your soul signature. It's a way you match with people. So that's something that's brand new for us that we're just launched. Yeah, it's all over the internet. Just Rythmia Love. It's a free app. And it's
one of the biggest challenges, when you're out there on Plenty of Fish or OkCupid or something like that, finding somebody who's on the same wavelength.
Yeah, it's not easy, and people are oftentimes people come to Rythmia that live in parts of the world that don't have any people think like them around. And they come to Rythmia and they meet a bunch of people that are similar to them and they really love it, and then they go home and they're just back to the same sort of, whether it's rigid thinking community or whatever, not open to this kind of thing, and they feel isolated and alone. And so the Rythmia Love app is to help with that and to help kind of bridge that sort of loneliness that people often feel.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so it's a lot happening here.
There's so many success stories here. So much has happened for so many people in positive ways. You've had a total of 6,000 guests, I understand, by now. So there's thousands of those. You have a 95% success rate, but are there any particular cases that really stand out in your mind?
I have a lot of those. Often people, they're, for example, diagnosed with depression, for example, in the West. they're usually thrown on a bunch of meds, and then they're supposed to go see a therapist. And so they usually have a psychiatrist that's prescribing meds, and they have a therapist they're working with hopefully once a week. And oftentimes, depending on their severity, they're going in and out of a psychiatric hospital or going to drug and alcohol rehabs. I used to run a rehab in Malibu called Passages. I was administrative director, so I'm very familiar with how rehabs work and what goes on there. And that type of treatment, whether it's meds or therapy, is usually very long-term, and it's also very expensive. And with meds, they're not always that effective. Now, some people benefit from meds, but most people eventually just don't. And so what I've seen here is that people come off of their meds to do the plant medicine because there's certain contraindications with SSRIs, for example.
Yeah, so many side effects of that stuff, huh?
Yeah, so you have to come off of those meds. And when people call our intake department, they explain exactly what that means. But so a lot of the guests that I see come in having 30 days or more free from their meds, and they have a history of depression, they have a history of trauma, and they're desperate to get healed. And they go through our program. They do a lot of work here. They do we have 4 plant medicine ceremonies each week. They go to all 4 of those. They do the breath work that we have classes, and they do the plant integration classes that we have. And then what happens is we follow up with these people after they get home. And we've noticed that most of them, almost 100%, do not go back to their meds. And they report having an amazing change in their life, that they feel better. It's sticking. It's not something that they have to always do, meaning they don't have to always do plant medicine. Some people like to do it to go deeper, but it's not something that you always have to do. It just resets you and you move forward. So I see a lot of those kind of cases all the time.
That is so significant. It just makes me wonder, how can that possibly take hold? Because there's so many people that would be threatened by that. The pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry, particularly in America, has so many issues and so many challenges with the way it's just so integrated with insurance companies and big money. And how do you see, if you were to maybe look 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, how do you see it maybe taking hold to help more people that are still really stuck in the American, pharma industrial complex?
Well, the way I look at it, it's going to probably go the same road as cannabis has, which means that cannabis has amazing benefits for a lot of people for a lot of things, whether it's seizures or mental health issues, or there's a million reasons that cannabis is very good for people, in CBD oil. And what was happening is everybody that uses cannabis knows this, and the government structures that are in place for many years were against it and blocking it. But then what happened was there was a grassroots push for, there's a demand from the public that we're no longer going to accept these restrictions, these legal, laws that are blocking cannabis. So it kind of started from the bottom and went up, and the governments had to respond because just the people demanded it. And it was something that eventually now is starting to get a foothold. And there's now the states are legalizing it in certain ways. There's still some states that need to do it, of course, but that's the model. I believe it's a grassroots push.
Yeah, that sounds positive. What I would kind of question about that is cannabis has gone from some guy up in Humboldt having his own patch out in the woods to NASDAQ-traded cannabis companies, and it's turned into a hugely corporate, publicly traded type of environment.
That's right.
And with ayahuasca, I don't know if we would want to see that. I don't know if we would ever want to see a corporate-owned vine cultivation plantation down in Peru with a bunch of indigenous people getting paid $2 a day to hack vine with machetes.
I agree completely. Yeah, that's kind of it's a hard balance to get that right, because if you legalize it, then that opens the door for the corporate sort of structure to come in. Right, and that's always something that's hard because you don't want to lose the authenticity of it. You don't want to lose the spirit of it.
You don't want USDA certified shamans. I mean, you don't want, government has its place. It would be hard to have a society without it, but you don't want them putting their foot into something that we already know works and has worked for 5,000 years.
I agree. What I learned at UCLA when I was studying public health, and I was looking at health policy mostly was my focus. I learned that incremental change is kind of the only way that things happen. And it would be great if there's a broad sweeping change that could all of a sudden things are legal and it's a certain way. And we'd love that. But the way that historically government works and also policy change is that it's small, little, incremental shifts, right? Now, Buckminster Fuller, right, that has the buckyball, and he described that change occurs through not destroying the structure, but growing a new structure on top of the existing one. And that was a really interesting concept that I believe is the way that this is going to go too. It has to kind of like work within the structure that already exists for it to actually happen realistically, in my opinion.
Have you ever had a politician down here?
Yeah. We have.
You know who I think about? Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, if you're out there, come to Rythmia. I don't know if you have already or not. That's your own business. But somebody like that. Oh, I love her. She's just enlightened. She's had some great conversations with Joe Rogan, and either her or somebody like her, somebody that really thinks in a modern way and isn't stuck in the old boy network of Washington politics. If somebody was down here and then could come back to Congress, and say, hey, look, you guys have got it all wrong. This is not Schedule 1 stuff. This is real. It's helping a lot of people. And I think what's so cool about the broader scope of the movement is there's so much being done with vets and the PTSD thing. Probably more so on the psilocybin.
We have a lot of vets here. Every week we have vets. We also have vet advocacy groups that come here. Yeah, so they're on board. They're totally on board. We all know that the veteran situation is a crisis.
It really is.
What are they saying? Like 7 vets a day commit suicide. It's just horrible. And so PTS is a big deal. And the reason why they took off the D, meaning a disorder, they call it just PTS now, is because it's a condition that anyone can have. Anyone can have post-traumatic stress, but veterans have a high level of that, and it's led to a dissociation where they're totally unplugged from themselves because of trauma and what they've seen on the battlefield, and it's leading to drug addiction, mental health issues, and basically just an unplugging from themselves, which is what's causing all this discontent in them. And so, the thing about the politicians is that it's going to take a few courageous ones, because, politics is such a ruthless profession that, the opposition to any politician is always looking for the chinks in the armor to kind of like come at them. So if somebody that's a politician does ayahuasca and then talks about it, they're going to be vulnerable at first, and then it's going to eventually get momentum and then be cool. But it's going to take those first few people, like you mentioned, that one politician just said, someone like her or others that have like the courage to really stand up and do it. And that's going to take a lot of gusto, as we say aquí in Costa Rica.
That's awesome. So one thing I've really kind of been wondering about, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm very curious to get your opinion on how plugged in you are with the larger scene globally, socially. What are you seeing? We keep talking about the plants want to expand, but I remember listening to some books or some podcasts, reading books about the explosion of ayahuasca, and plants are on the move, and then I look at the date on the podcast, it's 2014, 15, 16, I go, oh my God, 2019 now, if it was exploding then, what's it doing now? Are you seeing just major expansions globally, and what does that look like?
I've seen, for example, we get a lot of people from around the world here. We have a very high percentage of guests that come from Finland and Denmark, and like the Netherlands area, and a lot of Europeans come here, and of course a lot of people from the U.S. and Canada, of course, as well. But we're noticing that there's any culture or any country that has a little bit more of an open-minded sort of thinking process that's kind of looking at like the overall picture, they're more open to these kinds of remedies, and so they're the ones that are seeking this out. So as far as it being like expanding, it's still illegal in most places. Like 99% of the world, it's illegal.
Europe's harsh.
It is. There's very strict penalties, for people. It's criminalized. So in Oakland, California, right? That's an area that's decriminalized it. And
really?
They decriminalized plant medicine in general, psilocybin, ayahuasca, I believe some others. So they won't. It's not legal, but they won't prosecute people that are doing it or have it. So it's kind of like the first step.
Sort of like hands off for law enforcement.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's been proven to be so benign. There's none of the criminal element associated with it. There's no cartels or guns or any of that. It's all
exactly
so peaceful that then. how does it come into the country then? I mean, I'm sure everybody has their ways. I understand a lot comes from Hawaii, and
it grows in any sort of tropical area. Usually has some Hawaii, also all of Central America, Northern South America. There's other parts of Africa that have it, and there's just different parts of the world. It grows in Costa Rica, for example. Not as plentiful as Peru and Colombia and Venezuela, but it does grow. And there's often people that say, well, it's gonna be extinct because there's a lot of it being used. But the shamans that I talk to that have their finger on the pulse, they're growing it. They don't have that concern. The ones that I know. Now, of course, it has to be sustainable. You have to be planting and letting it grow, and we have to monitor it. That's just like anything, right? So a lot of people out in the world that have never been to Rythmia, or that, let's say, they have a lot of experience with plant medicine, and usually they're Westerners that say this. They say, well, the only way it's really going to be authentically given is if you go into the jungle and do it. Well, guess what? Most people aren't going to do that. And I just mentioned that in my class I just give. Most people aren't going to go off into the jungle to do this. So it has to be something that can expand to where people are, because people need this healing. And the world right now is in such a tumultuous, chaotic space that it's time now. It's time for us to connect again with nature and be back plugged into who we really are as people.
Yeah, that's one thing I really wonder about. It seems like kind of a paradox. We want to spread the word. We want to spread the healing. We want to spread the positive changes that it brings. So it would seem to me that on one hand, it would be a better world if many, if not most, obviously it's not for every single person, but if it was widely used, throughout, society for the type of problems we've been talking about, that would be a good thing. But at the same time, it's still a plant that's grown. It's not like we can go to a factory and just make an infinite supply of it. So how do you think that would play out? Do you think there's enough for everybody that's already growing? I understand, like, a vine that's over 5 years old can allow hundreds of kilograms harvested from it, and still be totally viable. So do you think that the supply is really there to be able to provide the healing for large parts of society?
I do, and I don't think that, let's say everybody in the world that it would be appropriate to take it, if they all took it right now, would there be enough? I don't believe so. But because of the way that the plant grows, that's the way that the availability will grow. That's the way that the legality will allow the growth. I think it's all connected. So it's sort of like this sort of chain that as people need it, as it becomes available, as they want it, as they seek it out, it'll manifest like that. Because that's what we're seeing, just with our own place. And we see a lot of people here every week, about 80 or more a week come here. And the way we're working with tons of shamans from all over the Latin America, and they don't have the concerns of this. Now, of course, we always got to be careful with that, right? Because we don't want to do something that would be destructive to the plant. We have to respect the plant, respect the process, and that's something we're always doing. We're always in tune with that. We make our own here, so there's a lot that goes into it. It's when you look at the big scale stuff, which is what I do, right? I look at the big picture. I'm just excited. I have a lot of enthusiasm for this because I see it helping so many people, and I see the way it's growing, and it's growing appropriately.
Merrill Merrill's one of the shamans here, had a fantastic presentation yesterday. He actually, drew out a pyramid representing different dimensions of life, starting with mineral and going up to basically angelic and everything in between. And he had associated with that with the chakras, and he had posited at the top of the pyramid the sort of divine feminine energy, if you will, being incarnated back to the plant level as the ayahuasca vine. And that might get a little spiritual for some people, but it was an extremely interesting concept. What are your thoughts on that? Do you really integrate the entire spiritual concept along with all the medical stuff?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're doing here, because the Western sort of medical stuff that we have here is basically for people to feel safe and comfortable, something they're familiar with. But then at the end of the day, what's really happening here, right, is that spiritual side based on the shamanic traditions and the healings of these plants. And so we believe that the feminine energy in the world is what is needed to heal the world. And as a man, right, I believe that the more women are empowered within themselves, the whole society rises. And so men would be smart to help empower women and not try to keep women down or oppressed, because that just, everybody suffers, not just the women, but the men suffer in that process. So the healing energy that's needed for growth and life and change and comfort and all the rest is a feminine energy. Now, as men, we have feminine energy in us.
Sure.
But it's not our dominant energy necessarily. For some it is, but for most men it's like masculine thing. But the more we embrace the feminine and allow that to heal us, everyone shifts. And that's a big part of what we're doing here, is incorporating that whole sort of dynamic into our program.
Sarah last night in ceremony had just such brilliant concepts. She's just so present, as all the shamans are. And, every word out of their mouth is something you can hang your hat on. It's so interesting. That's one of the things that just has astonished me here in a really good way. And she had mentioned something that in the Colombian traditions, they feel that a woman has the strength of 10 men.
Yes.
And the way that translates to us is it's part of a woman's power to share her power with men and elevate the strength of men. And I've never really heard it that way before, but the power of procreation and connection with the perpetuation of life is such power that when they share that with men, it can elevate all of us. And I don't know if I'm saying it exactly correct, but it was something along those lines. And such a beautifully interesting idea. And you really felt that a lot last night. I actually, had some, direct healing work, from Sarah, and we got to speak for a few minutes, and her along with everybody else here. What really strikes me is that the more medicine these people have done, the smarter they seem. It's kind of maybe oversimplifying, but it seems that every one of the people here, when they speak, their ideas are so clear, and they just seem like so in tune and so balanced and unified with everything they teach, be it Meryl or Brad or Sarah or Christian as well on the first night.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible
how
stuff.
How do you think that works? What's the mechanism behind that? With more medicine, does it actually?
Well, we believe that like there's this universal consciousness that exists that we can tap into, and we're all connected to everything. Because you look at the physics, and I took a year of physics at UCLA back in the day, and everything boils down to positive and negative charges. Just everything's made up of that, and so we're made up of the things that the universe is, and the plants and everything around us. And the more you're in tune with that, the more you have like this connection of universal knowledge. And so when you do plant medicine, you plug into that world, and it's something that's not foreign to you. It's something that you're a part of. But our physical eyes and our physical imperfections and our physical ways of mind thinking negative stuff, that blocks that pathway. So the more you open that pathway, and plant medicine is one way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it. Meditation and yoga and healthy eating and positive thinking, all that stuff helps do it. So when you're constantly in that space, you're tapping in more and more into this sort of universal knowledge. And that's where it flows. Like you mentioned with the shamans you talk to, is that they say these really cool things that are deep and really simple. Because that's how everything's kind of connected and works. And you just tap right into that flow.
Awesome. There were a couple things you mentioned in the class. We just got out of your class a few minutes ago. And I'm kind of a science guy. The past few days have made a little bit of a shift in that, but I've kind of always been a little bit to the rational, analytical kind of side of things. And if there's somebody here listening who is kind of on the fence about this, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, what's the science behind this? Okay, all this woo-woo stuff is great, but show me the data. Mm-hmm. You mentioned some things about the way it actually functions in the body as far as rebalancing some neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Could you refresh us on that a little bit?
Sure. So that's my role here at Rythmia, is to kind of bring the science and the medicine sort of stuff to this, right? So I've been studying it for about 5 years now. And so it's amazing what happens neurochemically and hormonally in the body. Now the brain has, in the spinal cord, in the neurospinal fluid, has neurochemicals in it. and there's a lot of them. But the main ones that I like to talk about with ayahuasca are serotonin and dopamine. And what happens with, let's say I have depression, I have usually a low level of dopamine, and I'm feeling sad or the blues, and my dopamine receptors are like not working too great, and I might have a little bit of low dopamine. So what happens with ayahuasca is one of the things it does is it goes in and it goes to certain neurochemical receptors on the neurons, and there's a synaptic gap, it's called the synaptic cleft between neurons in the brain and the spinal cord that have this sort of like space between them. And in between there flows neurochemicals, and that allows an electrical charge to pass and to go and communicate, and it's the way we think and behave and it's the way we live. And so what happens is when those receptors are not functioning correctly, or they're low, or they're not producing enough, the ayahuasca goes in there and resets them. It resets 5 key serotonin receptors and also helps balance dopamine. So what happens immediately is that we have a mood shift and we feel amazing because we're balanced again. So that's a big part of what's happening. And there's something called synaptic plasticity, which is a neurochemistry concept. The brain is not rigid. We used to think in neurochemistry that the brain was rigid after a certain age. Now, years ago. But we know the brain is constantly evolving and shifting based on like what's going on for us and what we're eating and what we're thinking and what we're doing. And plant medicine helps build new neuron pathways of connection that are healthier for us. And so the way trauma gets resolved neurochemically is that the amygdala is a part of the brain that stores our emotional and sort of psychological history of whatever we've dealt with in our life. So if I have trauma, the analogy I give, if I was 5 years old and I was scared by a dog, in my amygdala, there's a neuron pathway, to simplify it, that says dogs are fear. So there's an intellectual belief and there's an emotional belief. So I know dogs are scary and I feel they are and I stay away. But now I'm 50, I'm not 5, and I'm still afraid of dogs. I don't really know why, because everybody else seems to like dogs. No dogs are trying to bite me. I see a dog and I just stay away. It's kind of weird, right? So then I do ayahuasca. What happens is my amygdala connects with my prefrontal cortex, which is the emotional, rational, cognitive part of the brain, and they link up and they go, hey, guess what? When you were 5, you were scared by a dog, and that was appropriate, and you should have run and you should have been afraid because it was going to bite you. But now you're not in that space. You can sense dogs that are scary, and there's not a lot of them, and most of them are cool. And so now shift that pathway and make it stronger now in a new way that says dogs are nice, dogs are happy, dogs are fun, dogs are loving. And now my fear emotion that was attached initially comes up, and I feel the fear that I had at age 5. It leaves me, and now I have a new pathway of neural connection that's healthier for me. And that's how trauma is resolved in the brain with ayahuasca, and that's what's going on neurochemically.
Beautiful. Great explanation. For all you scientists out there, there you go. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
I also have some friends who are really interested in this whole thing, and I had done only one retreat before I got here. Had profound experience, very, very positive. And when our friends knew we were coming here, they were excited for us. But some of our friends have said, "Well, I don't know. It's just a little concerning to me. What if you have a bad trip? What if you see demons? That kind of thing." And I tried to kind of reassure them, but the darkness and negativity can be part of the experience. But what would you say to somebody who's concerned about that as kind of a fear factor? Because I know there's ways that can be managed. How might you reassure somebody if those are their concerns?
There's 2 sort of beliefs on this, and I tend to think both are valid. And the one way, I'll explain both. One is when you do plant medicine, when you do ayahuasca, you're still cognitively aware that you're doing it, unless you drank 10 gallons of it. So the way we do it at Rythmia is we dose you in a certain way that's really safe and you ease into it. So you're at Rythmia, you're in the Maloka where we serve the medicine, you're in a safe place. So what happens is, if I have historical trauma, and let's think about what are the emotions that were present when I was being traumatized. They're usually fear, anger, guilt, shame, resentment, confusion. Those are the emotions that happens during trauma. So what happens is those are gone into the amygdala for most of my life, and then ayahuasca brings them up. So if I was 5 when that happened and now I'm 50, I might be a little confused as to why I'm feeling scared. because I'm not in a scary place and I'm not being abused or traumatized. So my prefrontal cortex kicks in and it starts to give definition to something that could be scary. So then I see some demonic stuff, or I see something scary. And my brain creates these images to give context to these emotions that I'm feeling. So really there isn't this demonic thing happening or this spiritual darkness. There's just my prefrontal cortex is trying to interpret why I feel scared and upset. And so what I tell people if they have that is just feel the emotion of fear, feel the emotion of sadness, let it come up and it'll go quickly. So that's one reason that people could have, let's say, a bad trip, right? The other scenario is more what the shamanic sort of belief is that, and I believe part of this too, of course, is that, where there's great good, there's great opposition. Where there's dark, there's light. And there's this balance. It's Newton's laws, right, of physics, and right, it's just there's equal opposition to things. And so, sure, if you're trying to get healing, you're trying to break free from these negative patterns you've had your whole life, and you're starting to become enlightened, well, there's this dark vibe that's trying to kind of keep you back in that space or challenge you. And so, sure, there could be some sort of like a battle that goes on, I guess, for yourself spiritually in a sense, of course. But the beauty of it is that light overpowers the dark. And if you step into the light and you accept that's your goal and that's what you want, the darkness can't compete and it just fades. And so people that have what I would call a bad trip are just dealing with a lot of emotional trauma and it's surfacing and they're just trying to give context to it. And that's what we do here. Like I meet with people all week and we have all the staff that talk to the guests and help them understand the process, what's going on. And some people are scared and some people are confused and we help them understand what's going on. See, that's the beauty of like what we're doing, because in the jungle, drink this and we'll see you in a couple days. I mean, it's just like there's no real context. Now there's other places that do that are great, that are cool, right? But most of the shamanic work going on in the jungle for non-indigenous people has no context to it. So it is scary. It is weird. It does confuse people, right? So I tend to believe that it's just our emotions surfacing. We're trying to give definition to it.
Okay. Well, that's another interesting point I've been thinking a lot about. The context in the life of an indigenous person in the Amazon is very different than the context in the life of somebody living in LA with job and kids and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So notice there's variation in the ceremonies, and there's seems to be a connection to many of the traditions, from what I understand and hear. Of course, I'm not vastly experienced yet, but I intend to be. But as we get into Western society, there might be more recorded music. There might be, other things that might place the whole experience in the context of that environment. That's really quite different than the interests of somebody who may be living with traditions that are 5,000 years old, and they're more concerned with hunting, or if they're going to marry the girl in the next village, or what the migrations of the animals are, or maybe casting a spell on a guy you don't like, or something like that. Very, very different than people dealing with the things we've been talking about.
Definitely.
How do you see that shift happening? Do you think the actual structure of the ceremonies will evolve over time depending upon the environment?
Yeah, and I think that, if you think about what is a tradition in general, right? A tradition is a pattern of behavior that started at some point in time that a group of people follow. So we have our own tradition at Rythmia. We do our own way, and we respect the history of it, and we respect the years' belief system in it, but we have our own way of doing it. And our own way is creating these amazing results. And now
you can't argue with it, what works.
I can't argue with the data. We're collecting data every week here, and so getting that sort of indigenous pure experience, I think, is really cool. But if I'm not a part of that indigenous group, then it's not going to resonate with me in the same way that it would for someone from that tribe.
Exactly. You don't speak the language, and you just got to take it on faith that all of the chants they're doing are what's going to work for you.
And what happens too is that, for example, you mentioned recorded music versus live music, and I believe personally, if I could choose, I would say live music would be amazing. And the reason is because there's a certain amount of you can shape the music if you're playing it live to kind of match what's going on in the ceremony. It's more
that's interesting.
Yeah, you can kind of like play the drum a certain way depending on what's going on. Whereas if it's recorded, it's just recorded, right? But that's just something that, is a reality of just having a facility. Like sometimes we have live music here, but sometimes it's recorded. And it's just a matter of like, we don't have a million musicians, we have some. And so I think that the purists who say it has to be live, it has to be in the jungle, it has to be with these certain indigenous people, I think that is a really great experience for some. But I believe that people that say that have never worked with the type of patient population that I have, which are thousands of people living in crisis. They're suicidal, that have drug and alcohol history, have horrific trauma, and are not able to go to the jungle to do that. They don't have the means, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the physical ability. And having a place like Rythmia that can bridge that gap between the West and the indigenous communities, I think is essential. And it helps people get healing. So I tell people that say, oh, well, you guys should have live music all the time, and Rythmia is too this or that, it's not like indigenous enough. I say, well, we have a tradition here ourselves, and we're healing people, and they're doing the work for themselves, and we're creating an environment that can do that. And I just I don't get mad, but I get frustrated at that sort of critique from people, because people are dying. My patients were dying. They were dying of drug overdose. They were killing themselves. They were in and out of psych units, in and out of rehabs. They were not living. They were in turmoil. So basically what I'm saying to those people is, you're telling me, right, people, that the only way to get this is to go into the jungle and climb up a mountain and be with a shaman. If they can do that, right on. I'm all for it. But most of them can't. And so they can come here. And they have a psychological support system here that understands where they're coming from. They can give context to it.
And plus, you work with people with disabilities here.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a disability-friendly place.
If somebody can't even walk, they can still come here, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We've had blind people come here.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and deaf people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and that's something we can facilitate. And so we believe, we're not trying to say everybody has to come to Rythmia. But we're just saying, hey, we're for a certain amount of people that want to come, right? That resonates with them. And if people resonate in the jungle, cool. Like right on. Like whatever fits them,
There's something else I've been thinking a lot about cultural trauma. Obviously, you've got a huge population of African Americans in the USA whose ancestors were slaves. What a heavy thing to carry around.
Heavy.
I have no idea how that would feel because I'm not them, but I have compassion for that. People in the Middle East have suffered greatly over the past few years, and for decades there's always some kind of suffering going on there.
Definitely.
A lot of stuff going on in Africa. How do you see, or what opportunities do you see maybe to reach out to some kind of troubled communities that might be suffering from something more than just personal trauma, but carrying the weight of a cultural or ethnic type of trauma? Is there something there to help these folks?
Well, I think the best way to do any sort of work like that is to initially plug into yourself and get connected to who you are as an individual. Because once you're plugged into yourself, then you can have true empathy for others. And what empathy means is that you can feel what they are feeling. Sympathy is different. Sympathy is having the intellectual understanding of what someone's going through. And we can have sympathy for a lot of people. Like we have sympathy for the historical African American population that had slavery, because we don't know what it feels like to be it, because we're not African American, right? So, but I have sympathy for that. Now I can feel empathy for them if I can absorb the energy that they have as people and feel it for a moment. And again, I'm not them, but I can feel and resonate and understand, wow, this is a burden. This is, it lowers my self-esteem. It makes me feel like hopeless or whatever it is that they feel at the time. And then what I can do is I can connect with that person in a real way. Because if I hold somebody's emotional baggage for a moment, they get a break from it temporarily, and then I redirect it to them, and it's called a corrective emotional experience. And then they feel not alone in it, and they feel a little bit healed in it. Again, it doesn't heal their problem. They got to heal their own problem, but it helps them plug in, and I can understand and be a part of the system that's helping the vibe change. And so I think for these groups in the world that have these cultural, political sort of situations happening, the best way to work with that is to have true empathy for them. Because if I have empathy for somebody, I don't want to hurt them. I'm not going to vote that, bomb that country. I'm going to vote, let's support them in different ways, right? It's going to be a way that I can actually understand those people. Because I think all strife in the world is based on people not having empathy for others and just projecting their own sort of emotional baggage onto other groups.
I had heard somewhere that you guys have a program for people who are financially unable to come here.
Mm-hmm.
There's 100 people a year or something like that.
We have a scholarship program, and it's something that people, if they go to our Rythmia Facebook page, it outlines like how to apply for that, and they have to send in a statement like why and this and that, and we pick people all the time, and they come for free, and they get to do the whole program, and it's anonymous. They don't, people don't know that they're here on a scholarship. They just know that they're here like anybody else. And it's a great way to reach people that can't afford to get down here.
Has there been any kind of inner city folks that have
Absolutely
benefited from that sort of thing?
Yep.
To be able to, take some of that love back home?
Absolutely. Yep. That's the goal. That's the goal.
Beautiful. Maybe just one or two more things here. We're coming up on time here. I really appreciate you taking time to share with us here. I wanted to ask just a little bit about the iboga thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the history of this place, I've just learned while I'm here. I knew that Jerry had done iboga first. He uses the generic term plant medicine, but in that case, his initial experience was iboga, not ayahuasca. But yet he had learned from the iboga, but the best way to implement sharing this with more people as you've done is through ayahuasca, not iboga.
Correct.
Could you tell us just a little bit? I know a little bit about it from what I've read, never done it.
Mm-hmm.
Understand it's much more powerful, much longer lasting. But what can you tell us about the contrast between Jerry's origination of his work here and the fact that we're not using iboga here, but we're using ayahuasca instead? Is there still some value to considering iboga for some circumstances?
Iboga was my first plant medicine as well. And iboga is very intense. It's an amazing medicine. It's a miracle medicine, actually. It's very good for people that have opiate addiction. Now, there's one alkaloid in iboga called ibogaine. And what happens for people that most people think iboga is ibogaine only, but iboga is the full plant that has about 13 active ingredients or 13 alkaloids that have more psychospiritual components to it. So when people hear about iboga, they're thinking it's ibogaine, and that's for like really hardcore heroin addicts. And that's more of a medical procedure. It's more of like an inpatient hooked up to IVs and heart monitors, and it's really intense. But it's amazing for people that suffer from opiate abuse. It cures them, which is incredible. But iboga it lasts a really long time. It's very direct. It's kind of, they call it the stern grandfather as opposed to ayahuasca being the mother. Mm-hmm. So a stern grandfather analogy is that it's clear, it's harsh, it's right to the point. It just tells you what's going on.
Whereas ayahuasca, it can be that way, but usually it's more maternal, it's more loving. It shows you things often symbolically. It also can give super clear things, and it's great. What we learned through the process of doing these plant medicines is that iboga to do on a large scale is rough because you have an individual shaman guiding each individual person through their journey, and that's hard to do in a big group setting. Mm-hmm. So ayahuasca isn't necessarily like that, and you can have less people really right with you, even though we have a ton of staff in the ceremony, but they're not guiding the person individually through their journey. So that was what was a big part of why we use ayahuasca here. It's safer, it's legal in Costa Rica. Iboga is not legal in Costa Rica. It doesn't grow here indigenously. That's a part of the government's sort of regulations, that the plant has to grow here indigenously. Yeah, so iboga is from the Congo Basin of Africa, West Africa, so it doesn't grow here naturally. Somebody might be growing it, but it's not something that the government is okay with. So that's another big part of why we're using ayahuasca, because it's legal and we're approved medically to do it, and it's something that we can work with big groups on.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing this incredible wisdom. I mean, it's so cool that you've got the spiritual side of it, and you've got the scientific side of it too. So there's great information for people here of any persuasion. Any final words for our listeners? Places to go, websites.
I think
like that?
it's important to remember, right? Like most people think of plant medicine as this hippie thing out in the jungle with all these Grateful Dead people, right? Which I love them. I went to the Dead shows myself. But what's happening at Rythmia and what's happening with me personally, my background, I have 27 years working in the mental health field. I'm from UCLA Med Center. Like, I have a lot of history with all these degrees and all these things that supposedly made me legitimate in the scientific medical world. And I've not necessarily rejected that world. I've just evolved into a place where I can use that knowledge, but I can also incorporate all this stuff we're doing here at Rythmia in the more spiritual sort of shamanic realm in a way that's really safe. And the best way for people to learn about like what we're doing, if they like the scientific sort of psychological side of it, is to watch my Facebook Lives every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I talk 10, 15 minutes. I just go into all these little details about stuff, help people feel comfortable to come down here. So we hope that you can come and enjoy what we're doing here, because it's going to change your life.
Awesome. Thanks a million, Jeff.
Thank you. Pura vida.
Pura vida.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Again, this is Rob Rowe of the Shapeshifting Reality Podcast. Also working with Debbie Dashinger of the Dare to Dream Podcast. This will appear both places. And if you like this conversation, please leave us a 5-star review, maybe throw a comment there under YouTube. All of these things help create visibility for this show and the ideas that we discuss here for the community at large. And we really appreciate that a lot. We are on Spreaker, we are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the usual places. So let's get the word out, guys. We're really striving to do some good things, have some conversations with some brilliant people, and we really hope you enjoy it. And thank you very much for your support.